Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, you too. We have an update for everybody. We have embryos.
Let's take this back a little bit though to talk about how we got to embryos. For us, we chose to have an egg donor that is separate from our surrogate, so that we don't necessarily have a direct relationship with the biological mother of the child. With that, we had to enlist the help of an egg donor agency. We ended up choosing a company called Graceful Conception.
They are amazing.
They are great. In a world that seems very scientific and very numbers driven, we really wanted to have a little bit more empathy and human aspect to it. And Sandy and Judy, the owners of Graceful Conception, who are mother-daughter, they just provide a little bit more of that human aspect, and it really resonated with us. So we chose Graceful Conception, and we are really happy that we did. We mentioned that we wanted to be upfront about everything. We mentioned that there's setbacks along the way. Egg donorship is an area where we had a little bit of a setback.
A few months ago now, we did unfortunately get a phone call that our donor that we had signed the paperwork with, we found out that unfortunately she was backing out. It was kind of a hard pill to swallow. We didn't really get a very clear understanding of what it was, what the reasoning was. We jumped right back in. Graceful Conception again I could tell they were just as upset as we were. They were very helpful to put forth the best donors that they had at the time, and I think ultimately we ended up with a way better fit.
The egg donor piece is kind of weird to go through. It's like a Match.com dating site for egg donors. You sign into a profile, you put some filters in if you want to filter down what your egg donor's features are, and they spit out some profiles. You don't know anything about them personally, you don't know their name, but you have access to everything else. Information about their lineage, information about their parents, their grandparents, their siblings, genetic issues, whether they got a parking ticket in 2nd grade.
If they've ever had braces.
Right. It's a little bit weird thumbing through these profiles. It was like we were dating again.
I never thought I'd date a woman again, but I guess I am now.
All of the egg donors would fill out a piece of like why they wanted to be an egg donor.
Yeah. But you could tell if somebody was just giving an answer because they thought they needed to, or they actually felt passionate about it, and this one certainly did.
We got hooked up with our second egg donor. Like Josh said, it was just a lot better of a situation. Things went more smoothly from a legal standpoint. Things progressed really well from a timeline perspective. This particular egg donor that we ended up choosing in the end had done it previously, so we had an idea of what her production numbers, I know that sounds very terrible, but what her numbers looked like from the last egg retrieval, and those were great numbers. So for us, it ended up being a lot better.
So technically there are different options for how you want to go about getting eggs. They do have fresh options, and then they have the frozen.
The difference between fresh or frozen, a frozen lot, anytime you do an egg retrieval, they call them a lot of eggs. So a frozen lot has gone through a freezing process and a egg judgmental process to make sure that they can withstand freezing. So you'll often get a lot less eggs from a frozen lot. Usually you'll get more eggs from a fresh lot. I'm not necessarily sure why, but that's kind of what they explained to us. Josh and I wanted to split the lot so that we could have the same egg donor and that we could have 2 kids eventually, one with my sperm and one with Josh's, and that way the kid would have the same biological mother. Our egg donor initially had 32 eggs retrieved, which again was a really high amount. Of those 32, 30 of them were viable, which was awesome. Again, that's a very high amount. So we split that lot, 15 each, and we ended up at the end of the day with 15 total embryos to work with. And those embryos are graded on a scale using an A, B, C scale.
The Tucker scale, yeah.
Our particular agency uses the Tucker grading scale. Essentially, the grade is how likely the embryo is going to implant in a surrogate. We've sent those embryos off for genetic testing to see if there's any genetic issues. We'll also find out the sex and the gender of those embryos, and we can decide from there which ones we're going to try and go with. We mentioned that we wanted to be very open about the finances. From an egg donor standpoint, depending on the agency you use, you will have an agency fee that goes directly to the agency for managing the process, also identifying the egg donor, and then making sure that the egg donor meets any psychological needs, all kinds of stuff. The egg donor themselves gets paid anywhere from $7,500 to $10,000 per retrieval, and that number is based on whether or not they've done a successful retrieval before. There's legal fees, both on our end, and then we pay for the egg donor's legal representation. And then another major cost is medication for the egg donor. So I think all in, you're around $30,000 for the egg donor piece. Our surrogate that we've chosen to use, our gestational carrier, is on a fairly specific timeline. We have about 1 or 2 months to try for pregnation. Oh gosh, is that the word? Successful implantation of our embryos. Next steps, obviously, we'll get the genetic testing results back and we can move forward with trying to get our surrogate pregnant. Every try, unfortunately, is a big expense. So if the first embryo doesn't take, we do have 1 other month to try this year with this particular surrogate. And that'll be another few $1,000s to try a second time.
It's hard not to put pressure on the process, and I think the timeline itself does that, but there's also the financial piece, like you mentioned, that is just a little daunting to think that it could be 3 or 4 attempts. And in this case, that would mean 2 attempts this year and then waiting an entire year.
We're optimistic, cautiously, about the whole process.
Yeah.
It's weird to think that this could be our last summer without kids.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is definitely. I think every opportunity now, we're like, well, this is our last summer before
Anybody
we have
want
a
to
kid.
go on a vacation? We are definitely up for it this year.
Yeah. It still just doesn't feel fully real yet. I think it's definitely got us more emotional about the whole process.
I think for us, the biggest piece to keep in mind is that you're going to get updates from your fertility clinic along the way. It happens pretty fast, but to be realistic about what numbers might come out, I think realizing that you are going to go through a few losses of eggs and embryos along the way, along each part of the process, is good to know up front so that you're not caught off guard. Very blue, very monochromatic in here.
Oh yeah.
Well, this is going to be the nursery.
Yeah. My office space here will become no more.
This wall will be a different color.
I'm gonna do more of like a gender neutral green.
An olive green, maybe some wallpaper. We should do a whole design series. Nurseries by
The
nurses.
Crotties.
Ooh. Nursery. We got TBD on the name of that. We're
Yeah,
working.
we'll figure
We're
it
gonna
out.
workshop the name. Something about nursery.